Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's event, which is part of our 2025 Diverse Perspectives in Digital Media and Design speaker series, hosted by the Department of Digital Media and Design at the University of Connecticut. To paraphrase James Baldwin, nothing can be changed until it is faced. This is certainly true of the inequities that have historically shaped the entertainment industry, both on screen and behind the scenes. We'd like to begin today's event by acknowledging that the land on which we gather here in Storrs, Connecticut is the territory of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scatacoke, Golden Hill Pagaset, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. Today's event, Real Life into Real Life, Your Truth in Script Form, will feature a presentation and discussion with our special guest, Asha Michelle Wilson. For our virtual audience, please take advantage of the YouTube chat box to submit questions for our guest so that we can include them in our discussion. I'm Catherine Massoud, and I'm your host for this evening's event. I'm a filmmaker with decades of experience in both fiction and documentary, and I'm also an assistant professor in residence and member of the film faculty in the Department of Digital Media and Design at UConn. Digital Media and Design is a young department founded in 2013, which has rapidly grown to over 350 undergraduate and graduate students and 26 full-time faculty. We have 7 undergraduate concentrations across the full digital media spectrum: film production, animation, interactivity, business, and the humanities at both the Storrs and Stamford campuses. In our department, we value and celebrate our students' diverse backgrounds, and we support their development both as individuals and as professional media creators. Now in its 5th year, Diverse Perspectives in Digital Media and Design speaker series is one celebration of these shared values. Now onto the show. I would first of all like to welcome today's co-hosts and DMD students, Adam Gonzalez and Ernest Lowe. Adam Gonzalez is a video production artist from Bethel, Connecticut in the Digital Media and Design program at UConn. With a focus on film and video production, Adam has honed his skill set and his passion for storytelling and showcasing talents and communities. As a musician and a digital artist, he has a wide range of interests that define his work. Adam, great to have you join us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And Ernest Lowe is a student currently enrolled also at UConn, majoring in digital media and design with a concentration in game design. Throughout his education at the University of Connecticut, he has taken multiple classes in the history of digital media, computer coding, and created video games from scratch using an application called Unity. Ernest has also learned how to 3D model and texture by using 3D Studio Max and Adobe Substance Painter. As of late 2024, he had worked with UConn Athletics as a student worker in order to receive firsthand experience with digital media that would allow him to develop practical working knowledge and further discover his passion within digital media and design. Ernest, great to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now on to our guest. It is my extreme pleasure to welcome today's guest, Asha Michelle Wilson. Asha Michelle is a writer currently in development on series with Sony TV and 20th Century Fox, as well as being co-executive producer on the Fox animated series The Great North. She has previously developed with and written on series for Netflix, Amazon, Paramount, and FX, including American Horror Story and Archer. Her short film, Friends Like These, won the London Shorts Festival, and she was listed as one of BET's 6 Black female showrunners who helped inspire TV's diverse renaissance. Welcome, Asha. And now let's turn it over to Asha Michelle. Welcome to Diverse Perspectives.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So happy and excited to be a part of this. Yeah, I think, I guess first off, what a great intro, by the way. There were a couple of clips that we're gonna play that to kind of set up what we're talking about. And they're both from an animated show that I wrote on called Archer for FX from season 12. And it was an episode that was set in Africa, which we'll talk about. And one of the storylines featured one of the main characters, Lana. The other character, Archer, sort of blatantly says that this trip is sort of a birthright for her. And her storyline around that plays throughout because it ends up being sort of the opposite. So these two clips kind of show Lana's arc in the episode, and I'll talk more about that after.
Okay.
Girl from the West is the look of spiritual awakening. No, I was actually wondering about how far that Four Seasons was. Honestly, my roots are all about toro tuna sushi, fiachi designer lingerie, and not getting bit by snakes. Okay, then. It's beautiful, isn't it? Yes, it's breathtaking. I've never seen anything like it. The earth, the water, the air, it's like everything working together in harmony to create the truest and purest form of life. And it's just so beautiful. Don't you feel nothing? Nope, not a thing. I think I like nature a lot better in theory. Oh, hey, little guy, where are you? Venomous extremely. Okay then.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize that I wasn't actually sharing the screen yet. Let me just play the second one again.
Little face. It's beautiful, isn't it? Yes. Wow, it's breathtaking. I've never seen anything like it. The earth, the water, the air, it's like everything working together in harmony to create the truest and purest form of life. And it's just so beautiful. And you feel nothing? Nope, not a thing. I think I like nature a lot better in theory. Oh, hey, little guy. Where are you? Ow! Oh, all right. So, that snake. Venomous extremely. Okay then. I'll call for medevac. Thank you, my sister. Sorry, I think the venom's already getting to me. Woohoo! Africa!
I'm just going to show this other one again because it's very short, but we weren't able to actually see it before.
Uh-oh, seen it a million times. Black girl from the West gets the look of spiritual awakening. Oh, no, I was actually wondering about how far that Four Seasons was. Honestly, my roots are all about toro tuna sushi, fiachi designer lingerie, and not getting bit by snakes. Okay, then. Everyone quiet.
Oh, God, is it a crocodile?
No, I think it's...
Shit, and we don't have guns. This is why you never listen to the United Nations.
My apologies, Asha Michelle. Technical difficulties.
It happens, no worries. So yeah, well, I mean, imagine those clips flipped. But yeah, that when I was initially brought in to write the episode, there was some stuff that they kind of already had decided that the episode was going to be about, and a lot that I kind of brought in for the episode. Should I just kind of like hop into talking about that, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So I initially was contacted by them because I was working on a different project with FX, and I think the Archer guys, who I've now worked with for many years, had the idea to do an episode set in Africa that was kind of part of the season arc. And I remember when they first reached out to me, because FX had given them my information, they were like, we just want to say, just because the episode's set in Africa, that's not why we want you to write it. I was like, guys, it's fine, don't worry about it. But they talked through the episode and they said they wanted to kind of give Lana a really specific story, and I always loved Lana. And I had, at that time, about 10 years before, gone to Jamaica, where my dad is from, and we had taken like a family trip. And I made the joke that it was like my birthright to go back to Jamaica, and I was really excited to see it, and I felt like I would feel so connected to everything, and I would really like learn about myself and all of that. And I went and I felt nothing. I felt like I was just sort of hanging out in Jamaica. We went to the country part of Jamaica and the resort part of Jamaica. And I was like, it's beautiful, and it's a great place to go, but I didn't feel like as connected to it as I thought I would. And I really liked that idea for Lana for this episode, that she's from California and she has very specific tastes and is kind of type A, and she is this environmentalist, and she likes the idea of saving the environment and the nature, but in actual practice, it's not something she can really connect to. And so kind of bringing that into that character was a little selfish, because I got to include something of myself in Lana, but something that they also liked as a sort of arc for her throughout the episode. And that was kind of something personal that I was able to infuse into the character in that situation. But I think on a larger level, kind of being brought in to write the first and only episode that the show had set in Africa, at first I did have that feeling of like, oh, is that just the only reason that I'm on it? And I, regardless of, they said that it wasn't, and I believe that it wasn't, but even if it was, doing the episode and having a lot of fun with the episode and kind of making it both personal and, adding my own stuff into it, led to me writing on the show for 2 more seasons, episodes that weren't set in Africa at all. So I think that for me was kind of my like baseline lesson of sort of, something that's often said a lot in kind of diversity and entertainment circles of like, yes, you get your foot in the door, but what actually matters is like what you do with it. And I think those clips kind of were representative of that for me.
Yeah, I was struck because you said it was kind of selfish for you to put a little bit of yourself in it. I mean, why would you say it's selfish, Jaime?
I only say for this specific case, because I was a big fan of Archer prior to writing on it. I'd actually dressed as Lana for Halloween back in like 2013, which was like 5 or 6 years before I wrote for the show. So only selfish because I put something of myself into a character that I'd really loved for a really long time. Normally, it's not selfish to do that. I think that's such an important part of writing, is finding the things from your own life to insert either into the story or into the characters, but finding the right ways to do that and the ways that make sense. I think a lot of people, something I always say is that like everyone has at least one great screenplay in them, like something from their life, something from their own journey that would make a good, movie. But the trick is kind of knowing how to do that, and what parts of it are worth including and what parts aren't. And I think sometimes when I read scripts from people who are just starting out and, they have this experience of being a camp counselor or working in a restaurant or babysitting or whatever it was they did, it's kind of really, really zeroed into what actually happened. And they're like, it's all based off of real stuff. And unfortunately, you can tell because it doesn't follow the kind of storytelling arc that you want to, because life doesn't follow a storytelling arc. And so I think it's important to, you can base characters on real people, real quirks, and real situations. But I think making sure that it's still interesting and engaging to someone who wasn't in that situation by sort of, transmuting it into a movie arc or a TV arc in a way that makes sense for the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thank you. Very well put. Well, I'm going to hand it over to our student co-hosts. They've actually prepared a number of questions for you that were culled from the whole class together, actually, after they looked at the material that you shared with us. So Adam and Ernie, I'm handing it over to you.
Okay, I have a question in regards to the Archer episode you just talked about.
Yeah.
I know you said they already kind of had an idea of what they wanted. So did that limit you in your writing?
That's such a good question. So with lots of TV, but animation as well, a lot of times there will sort of be freelance writers brought in for the season to write a few episodes throughout for various reasons. And that season, they had kind of already laid everything out of knowing what they were loosely going to do. But I was still brought in fairly early on in the process. Like I wrote the outline and was like working directly with them and working on the script. I think in my specific case, I've heard other versions of it, but in my case, it didn't feel limiting for a few reasons. One is it was my first time freelance writing a script. I'd only been in writers' rooms prior to that, so it was helpful coming in to sort of know like the information that I got was here are the main things that need to happen in Act 1, main things in Act 2, main things in Act 3. Here are the characters that you need to include. There was a 2 or 3 guest characters in the episode that were either brought in from previous ones or was like Archer had a lot of like, here's the specialty guest star for the episode. So they already knew who that was going to be. But I think that in this case, those sort of limits really helped expand the things that I could do and the jokes that I could tell. They were really open with sort of, if you want to make any changes, that's fine, just let us know. And I think, with the example of me kind of inserting my own Jamaica experience into it, they were fine to sort of allow that freedom, which I really appreciated. And I think especially when you're a younger writer, sort of having certain limitations can be helpful because when you're writing for a show that already exists, because there's already a tone that's set, there's already a type of humor. And because I was a fan of the show, I at least knew the type of humor the target I was supposed to be hitting. So I think there were, yes, a few limits, but in this case, they were really helpful so that when I came back for future seasons, for season 13 and 14, I kind of knew what I was doing, so I didn't really have those limits the next time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Also talking about Archer, I was wondering about the writing process with Archer seems a lot different than I guess for other shows. Just mainly because there seemed like there was so much dialogue.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that it was like 60 seconds of dialogue is like, or 60 seconds of the show is just 2 full pages of dialogue or something amount of pages of dialogue. Yeah, is Archer like more difficult or was it more interesting to have to write that much dialogue, I guess? And yeah, what was that like?
Yeah, I think, again, for my personal experience prior to Archer, I was on American Horror Story, which was very different, obviously, tonally. And that show, American Horror Story, was more kind of built around what's called set pieces. So for like most genre shows, but specifically a horror show, you're going to want to have set pieces of like, this is our horror set piece of like, this character is getting killed, that's going to be a whole thing. And that has a lot less dialogue. It's more about setting the tone and making sure the kind of things that need to happen are happening. So while there was plenty of fun dialogue, especially for season 9 of Horror Story I was on, speaking of real life into real life, I was a camp counselor, and that season was about camp counselors. So there was a lot of my personal experience that was brought into that. But then going to Archer, it was a lot more dialogue heavy, even though it's still an action show, which is the way that I tend to write anyway. So I think it was kind of nice to sort of, be able to lean into that side of things. But yeah, I think some shows can be very, very regimented of like, it's a 22-minute show, it's going to be a 22-page script. But I think in animation, especially, there's a lot of flexibility because you can record the lines different ways. You can sort of play in that space in different ways that you can't always in live action. But it genuinely does depend on the show because I think famously Gilmore Girls would have like 75-page scripts for a 42-minute show, just because they spoke so incredibly quickly on that show. And I think with Archer, I remember the first time I met with the guys, they had read a sample script of mine, and they said that what worked well about bringing me onto Archer is that I wrote at like a snap pace where it was like line, 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 line. There wasn't sort of like a big, I think the fake rule they had was sort of when you looked at a script page, if it was more than 2 fingers of dialogue on the page, there should be another line. It was like, you kind of want to keep it snappy. So I think that was specific for that, but it was nice because it kind of kept it snappy and fun. And I like writing that way.
I have a question about just being successful as a whole. What skills or qualities do you think are most important for success as a series writer, and how have you honed them over time?
Yeah, that's funny. It's always funny to talk about success in regards to the entertainment industry because it can feel like a moving target so much. You reach a certain level and you're like, yes, I did it, but now there's another mountain to climb and I'm going to the next thing. But I think in terms of the levels that I've hit, I would say when you're starting out as like well, I actually think this is true of any level that you're at. I think finding a gap and filling that gap is like one of the main things that is helpful. When I was a writer's PA, this is a story that I've told before, but when I was a writer's PA, I was working in a room which is like when you're a writer's PA, all you really do is get food and get office supplies and answer phones. That's pretty much it. And I knew the like showrunner of the show I was on really loved eating double stuffed Oreos. He had 2 every afternoon after lunch every single day. And I was buying the groceries, and so obviously I always made sure there were double stuffed Oreos. And I remember one day after I'd worked there like a month, I just overheard him say something about how the Oreos get stale so quickly because the packaging doesn't like keep them fresh. And I heard that and I was like, okay, clocked. And so the next week I bought those hermetically sealed jars that you kind of put food in the kitchen to like seal it up. And I stocked the kitchen with those and I put all the Oreos in them and I put like some nuts in the other one and some chips in the other one. And I remember he came into the kitchen and saw it and he said, oh my God, who reorganized the kitchen? It looks amazing. And someone was like, Asha did it. And he was like, that's really good. And the Oreos stayed so fresh forever. And I tell that story only because it was a very clear like gap of like, here was a thing that I feel like when you're a writer's PA, your job is to just make writers' lives easier. And I was like, here's a thing I can do to try and make their life easier. And as silly as it is, just like Oreos, it genuinely made a big difference. And now the showrunner knew my name, knew I was capable, knew that like I cared about double stuffed Oreos as much as he did. And I think those things really matter. So as I moved up to writer's assistant and then to staff writer, I think that mindset really played of like, what are the gaps? What are my strengths that I can sort of lean into to fill what needs to be filled? And so I think as a writer, when you're in a room, sort of taking that idea with you, I really find that building a writer's room is a lot like building a football team, building like a sports team where, you know, yes, you want to have like a great kicker, you want to have great defense, you want to have, you know, and you can't have everyone on the team be good at the same thing because that's going to be a really bad team. And so you want to have someone who's great at character. You want to have someone who's great at what's called blue skying, which is when you just like are throwing out random ideas and seeing what sticks. You want to have someone who's great at dialogue and all of that. And so for me, I knew that my strengths were, I have a really, really good memory. I knew I was really good at character, and I knew I could do dialogue because I like talking so much. And so, you know, when I was just starting out as a staff writer, yes, you want to come in with pitches. That's a big thing. You want to always have ideas. You don't want to do what's called blow darting, which is just, you know, saying what would be wrong with something. That's a really easy thing to do in a room, and it can kind of make you become like the negative person in the room. So you do want to come in with ideas and fixes, but the way that I kind of filled the gap is that I was good at remembering everything that happened in the show. Because I had seen it. So if we were like pitching something and they were like, oh, what do we know about like this character's family history? I could be like, oh, well, I know she has two sisters and a brother and her parents are divorced because we talked about that in season 3. And that was like a small thing, but as a new writer, it was like, oh, that's an immediate value that I could have. And so I think that, you know, you have to figure out the thing that works really well for you, because ultimately being in a writer's room is about, can you hang? Can you like bring in good ideas? Are you adding value? And I think on top of that, speaking to the theme of this session too, is when you're coming up with ideas, I think the best place to start is bringing in things from your actual life, depending on the show you're on, of course. But, you know, I was just on The Great North, and one of the episodes I wrote, one of the stories was about the kind of teen girl character really wanting to like make out with a boy, and she just keeps meeting really crappy guys who have horrible personalities, but they're all really hot, and it's spring, and she's like, I just gotta make out with somebody. And that was a pitch based off of something that happened to a friend of mine and I like in college. And I was like, oh, this could be a fun story for like a teen girl wanting something to happen. But instead of making it what actually happened to me, which was like me and a friend in college, trying to like find someone to make out with before Halloween, I made it, you know, this character. I thought about what made sense for that character. She's in high school. She lives in like a small town in Alaska. And so I ended up making it about guys who are coming in on a cruise ship and coming into town. And so she suddenly has all of these options that she didn't before, of like guys that are only going to be here for like a day. And so I feel like that's an example of like taking something from my actual life and bringing it to the room and being like, here's an idea, and kind of making it work for the show that already exists.
And just to elaborate on that a little bit more, do you prefer writing about things that you've kind of experienced in your life, or just fresh ideas just that come out of nowhere? Like
These are great questions. I think it's both. I think starting from your real life is always a good starting place, especially if you're stuck. You know, if you have ideas about things that have nothing to do with you, that's amazing. Like, yes, go with that. But I think that bringing in stuff from your own life can make it feel more true and honest. And that's how you want to bring the audience in, bring the viewer in, make it feel engaging and active. And so while I, you know, do like connecting things from my own life, there's still ways to do it for really out there stories. So, you know, personally, there's a show that I'm working on right now with Sony that is about 2 witches who get kicked out of hell and end up living in Salem in 1690 and trying to survive in a world that, if they knew the truth about them, would want them dead. That has never happened to me before, and I hope it never will. But I have spent a lot of time reading tarot. I come from very hippie witchy families. I was so obsessed with the Salem witch trials growing up. And I wanted to tell a kind of story about that, set in this time period in this weird kind of crucible-esque universe. But I based the two main characters, I based their sort of internal struggles off of my best friend and I. And because even though it's a show set in the past, in a world that none of us have actually lived in, I wanted to make sure that it still felt modern and connected to people now. So, and the initial kind of connecting point, how I came up with that was actually when I was writing it was during 2020, during a lot of the Black Lives Matter marches. I was obviously we were all hearing horrendous stories of what was happening is still happening to so many people. And I remember talking to a friend and saying something that I immediately had to check myself on, which was, I just don't understand why people would live in a place where other people want them dead, essentially, want them out of it. And I couldn't understand. And then I immediately was like, shouldn't matter. People should be able to live where they want to live and without the fear of that hanging over them all the time. And that actually brought me to kind of putting that into the script of these two witches living in an environment where everyone would want to kill them if they knew the truth about them. But they're making a home there and they're like, no, we deserve to live here. We want to live here and we should live here. But doing it in a comedy, but doing it in a way that still feels very real and true and relatable and based off of real conversations I'd had and real things that were happening. And so I guess the cleanest answer to your question is both. That I like doing both because I think that it gives something really true and honest to even something as silly as an animated comedy, which I think is ultimately what we're all after as storytellers.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, so that the Two Witches show, that's a comedy actually?
Yeah, it's an animated comedy.
That's that's interesting. Um I'm wondering what inspires you to make comedies or and such like a range with American Horror Story and then doing Archer in this new show is and then how you get offered to write these shows. Is it just because the higher ups know that you're funny or I'm not sure.
Well, I started the first show that I ever was staffed on as a writer was American Horror Story. But coming into that, I had sort of, the creator of that show has still does, and even at the time had a lot of shows on the air. And there was another show that I was kind of in talks to work on. But one of my bosses kind of came in and was like, we really want you staffed. American Horror Story, the writer's room is starting a little sooner. It's a really great title. We'd kind of like to have you in that room if you're interested. And to be honest, I was kind of scared, not because it was horror, but because I had never really written horror before outside of maybe like a kind of parody of it. But I'm kind of in the mindset of like, if it scares you, then maybe I should do it. And to be totally honest, it was starting sooner, and I was an assistant who wanted to be making the salary of a writer. So I said, yes, I will take that job. And so I got to start on that show. And that's a very specific situation. There's not a lot of, I was very gratefully and very magnanimously sort of given the choice of if I wanted to work on a different show or work on American Horror Story. And that doesn't happen very often where you can actually choose. And so in that case, that was sort of a specific one. But after that, I think because American Horror Story is a title that a lot of people had heard of, even if they hadn't seen it, I think that can go a long way. And so I was able to get meetings with people based off of that. And the script that I had was a comedy, but it was a comedy that had certain horror elements to it because I wanted to write comedy. And I think what has always drawn me to comedy and still does is I find that comedies tend to be the shows that people rewatch the most. It's always the shows that I rewatched the most, the shows that were like comfort shows. I think you know there are so many incredible shows. The kind of golden age of television shows um, that are dramedies or really intense, and I think those are all great. But a lot of times you don't want to rewatch them because they're anxiety driving or they're stressful. And before bed, you want to pop on like a Bob's Burgers or a New Girl or a 30 Rock for me. And so I was always in the mindset that like I want to make those shows, the shows that make people feel good and make people happy, that have characters you want to hang out with and laugh with and at sometimes. And so the transition from that was sort of having a script that someone could read and be like, oh, I know she worked on American Horror Story, but clearly she wants to do comedy. So it kind of made sense for both sides of that. And that sort of, because I had the relationship with FX from American Horror Story, that led to them suggesting me for Archer. I was developing a show with them at the same time as well. And so it kind of worked out. And I think since then I sort of swung between genre television and animated comedies because that's kind of where I've been working. But yeah, I think it's sort of, I think at this point, I've worked in animation enough that no one's really surprised to see me or talk about me in an animated space. I mean, maybe some people are. I don't speak for all of LA, but I think luckily I've been able to sort of establish myself there well. And I really like animation a lot. I think it's a lot of fun. There's so much that you can do. And so, yeah, it is weird. I will say, honestly, when you get to a place where it's like, oh, my name, like I'll get a kind of email of like, hey, they've been talking about you for this. And I'm like, they've been talking about me? What? It's kind of surprising when you get to that point. But it is nice to kind of have your name be said in rooms about something that you really like doing.
That's awesome. That's also really interesting hearing about your inspirations with like 30 Rock, I guess somewhat older shows, and then small question, I'm curious about maybe like new shows that inspire you with comedy or anything.
Yeah. Oh, it's so funny. Anytime someone asks this, it's like every show that's ever existed just seeps out of your brain immediately. But I think okay, most recently, I was a big fan of I watch a lot of British comedy, just I really like the way that they write their characters and dialogue. But Ghosts UK, I was a really big fan of, and I know the Ghosts US is like really popular over here, and I kind of liked I think I think it's hard to do an adaptation well, and I think they did a good job with it as someone who really likes the UK version. I also have a lot of friends who have written on some procedurals. I feel like the network procedural is back, and I really have actually been enjoying Elspeth and the new Matlock. I think I have friends that have written on that are writing on both of those. So there is a personal connection to those, but I think there's sort of I've never really been a true crime person. And so I didn't really understand the like cozy mystery thing that a lot of people got into. But a few weeks ago, I stumbled upon a Murder She Wrote kind of marathon, and I was like, well, I'll give it a try. And that kind of opened the door to me understanding why people like those shows. So I think the new procedural sort of lean in that direction of that kind of cozy mystery with a lot of comedy still infused into it. I feel like both those shows have that, which I really enjoyed. And like everyone, watched Succession and White Lotus and all of that. And I think am always a sitcom girl. I think, and so I will not be the first or last person to talk about Abbott Elementary, but I feel like that show, brought the sitcom kind of back in a way that sort of had been missing from network for a while. And so that I think those were sort of, and I think those are all shows that I would introduce people to, or I think Abbott Elementary is a great rewatch show. I love that they did an Always Sunny crossover because I've been a fan of that show for over a decade now that it's been on. So yeah, I think those are kind of the ones, but I rewatch things a lot. I've like just started a 30 Rock rewatch for like the 50th time. So I think that's why it's also on my mind.
Did anyone in particular inspire you to start writing? I'm just curious, like how you started writing, or like what made you.
Yeah. I started writing because I am a little crazy. I think my parents told the story at my college graduation that I first started writing when I was 6 for two reasons. One was the TV show All That, which I know things have come out about it since that are horrible, but at the time when I was 6, I really loved All That, and I was the way they kind of set up the show. Obviously, it was like SNL for kids, but they did this thing where they every at the start of every episode, all the kids, like it was a Nickelodeon show, and all the kids would kind of be sitting around who were on the show talking about what was happening in that episode, and they made it seem like the kids were writing the episode. I know now as an adult that it was a bunch of people in their 30s and 40s writing this kid show, but at the time they made it seem like kids wrote the show, and I was like, I want to do that. And I remember telling my mom, I was like, I want to be one of those kids. And she was like, okay, sure. Yeah, we'll wait till you change your mind. And I never did. And I think alongside of that, I really just, I liked telling stories. Like when at the advent of the internet, when that kind of started, I remember I would look up jokes to tell people and like adult jokes that I didn't understand. And like if my parents had friends over, I would like tell these jokes that I didn't understand to these like, adults, and they would all laugh, and I was like, that feels good. And so I started writing my own to see if they'd play, and they did, and I was like, yes, I want to keep doing this. So I think those two things alongside each other. And the first thing that I remember writing was a total knockoff of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And I'm not kidding, her name was Mabrina. And I wrote like a short story about Mabrina the Teenage Witch. And I wrote it on my mom's computer. And yeah, that kind of just like kicked things off. And I'm grateful that I was around people who were supportive of it. I think my mom didn't really think I don't think she ever doubted that it would happen. She was always supportive. She sent me to writers camps and bought me journals and all of that, but I don't think she thought that it would stick the way that it did. But I'm grateful that I was around people who kind of championed me to continue doing it. But yeah, and in terms of like specific role models, I mentioned it so much, but truly 30 Rock and Arrested Development were really, really big ones. I was also, and still am a fan of Doctor Who, which is like a British sci-fi show that's been on the air forever. But I think that show and Buffy, if you're interested in writing genre, are game changers, obviously. But I think they're really good at teaching how to set up a story really clearly, because Doctor Who specifically, every episode sort of is like an episodic, they're on a new planet or in a new time and introducing new characters. And I think in terms of figuring out how to introduce characters that you immediately connect to and care about and then tell the story, I think a lot of genre TV is very good at that, because they kind of have that episodic, like, here's the thing of the episode, get invested into it quickly. So those were kind of the big earlier influences for me.
So about writing, curious how you do it and what your workflow is like.
So I think there is a lot of narrative around like the importance of writing every day. And I think that if you're someone who kind of likes that structure, you should definitely do that. I am not that at all. I'm not someone who writes every day. I do think I'm always thinking about the stuff that I'm working on. I take a lot of notes. I have notepads everywhere. It's like I have notepads and pens everywhere that I just will like grab if I'm like I have an idea, or I have so many notes on my phone of like ideas. But I don't actively sit down to write every day unless I'm like in a room or I'm like in development on something specific with like a deadline. Um, I think for me personally, I tend to really start with character. Like I won't be able to write a scene if I don't understand who the characters are and where they're coming from. Something that Adam Reed from Archer actually said is, the best shows are the ones where you can take your characters and drop them into any setting. They could be anywhere, doing anything, and it could still work because you know who the characters are. If your characters are in a different setting and it suddenly is like not a good show, then you need to know your characters better. And so that's always been a big thing for me because once I know the characters, then I can hear them talking. You can kind of hear the conversation that they would be having. And so a lot of the early work that I put into something is figuring out who the characters are. And then once I know that, I think the dialogue just kind of like flows because you know them. It's like, what, your sister and your best friend, when they meet, you kind of know what their vibe would be together. And you should know your characters just as well as that of what they'd be together. And so, God, I keep mentioning the same shows, but it's just on my mind because we're watching 30 Rock. But um, something Tina Fey kind of talked about, I think in her book about 30 Rock, was that the Liz Lemon character is the lead of the show, and the Jack Donaghy character, who's the other lead, that they were exact opposites. That she was kind of like this modern feminist liberal, and he was this like capitalist conservative businessman. And so every conversation they've had, they would have opposite opinions about everything, and that was a good basis for a show. And so I think when you can kind of know your characters that well, especially if it's like someone based off of you, let's say if you're putting some of yourself into that character, then I think you can kind of go from there. So that's usually the way I do things. If I'm in a writer's room, which is obviously different than just developing my own show that I've come up with, my workflow usually tends to go with me starting with the scenes that I know. Like whatever scene that I can like hear the characters or how they would talk, I write that scene first, and I write as many of those scenes as I can until I run out. And then I start filling in around that and figuring out what those gaps are. And then I kind of go through and edit everything to make sure it's clean. Because I think it's a lot of wasted energy to force yourself to work on something you haven't figured out yet. Like if you haven't figured it out, sometimes sitting and staring at the blank screen is only going to hold you up more. Sometimes I think it's more important to sort of like go for a walk, go have a drink with a friend, go watch a show that's like similar to something that you're working on, and then allow that to sort of infuse the work. But I think ultimately starting with what you know and what you can see or hear or feel for what you're working on, and then building out from there is how I tend to do things.
That's interesting. This also sounds like a lot. I'm also curious about how does that change when you have a team? Yeah, because you've worked in writing rooms, and then you've also written. I'm not sure with Archer, did you write the entire episode, just the entire thing with no help or just a tiny bit of help?
For for the first two seasons on Archer specifically, there wasn't really a room. We were kind of just like given our episodes and worked separately. But for the last season that I was on, we had a room, so we did kind of like break story together. But I still wrote the script on my own. And it's similar for like the Great North. It's usually like that for comedy writers' rooms, is that you sort of everyone breaks story and ideas together, and then one writer goes off and writes that script. And I think if you're working on something with someone else, so I think it can actually be easier because you're not just like in your head, figuring it all out on your own. Obviously, it's helpful when it's someone you can bounce off of easily, but usually in a room, you kind of all come up with the premises together. You break the story, and you kind of figure out, okay, what's the character arc throughout the episode? What needs to happen? What do we want to happen? Because you don't just want to send the writer out blind and like hope that it comes back as something you like. But I think if you're working one-on-one with somebody, the times that that's happened, which for me has usually been things I've developed, not necessarily writers' rooms. I think a lot of times we do the process together where we sort of decide, okay, let's figure out what every beat is, like every scene that's going to happen throughout the episode. And then we usually like, you kind of know which ones that you're more drawn to. Like as a writer, you're kind of like, oh, I want this romantic scene and I want this kind of like intense dramatic scene. And you kind of just like split them up that way. And then what I usually like to do is you split up the writing of it, hopefully 50-50, and then you kind of switch. You kind of like what's it called? You kind of switch your scenes and you kind of read through what they have and you can make edits on each other so that it flows well. And then you kind of like read it all through and edit together. But I think every writing team has their own version. Like I know there are some writing teams that like to write everything together. And so no one's kind of going on their own with it, which I think works too. It's just not the way that I like to do it. I kind of like to be in the zone writing and then sort of come back and edit together for writing a script. But I think for like premise and outline writing, it can be helpful to have a team around so that you can kind of really, workshop it and make sure that the story works. Because I'm sure the writers out there know sometimes you're working on something and you're like, this is good, this makes sense. And someone else reads it and they're like, this doesn't make any sense. And so I think having someone else there could be helpful for those times.
When talking about the industry, how do you think it's evolved in terms of diversity and inclusion, and like what still needs to be worked on in order for things to be where they should?
Yeah. I've said this before, and I'll probably say it again over what I hope to be a long career is it's better than it was 15 years ago, and it's better than it was 10 years ago, and it's better than it was 5 years ago, and it'll be better in 5 years. I think, you know, having been out here, I've been working in the industry now for, oh my gosh, over 10 years, professionally as a writer for a little bit less. Um, and there are things that happened earlier on in my career that I know would never happen now. And I think seeing that change has been really nice and kind of makes me remember that we, despite what it seems like, we are moving in the right direction overall. But I think there's always ways to make it better. I think luckily we're seeing so many different types of content come out of different types of people, which I think is important. The metaphor I always use is like, if you spent your whole life just watching movies about deer and you've just seen movies about deer, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, a movie about a turtle, you would be like, this is the greatest thing ever. And that's kind of how I feel about diversity in TV and film, where it's like, there have been a lot of things made about like straight white guys. And so when you see something that's not that, you're like, oh my gosh, yes, this is amazing. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be any more movies about deer, just means there should be things. But I think behind the scenes, it's kind of always in flux. I think the industry is sort of having a moment right now. I think it was sort of like COVID, and then we didn't quite recover from COVID, and then it was 2 strikes, and now we're like kind of trying to recover from the strikes. So I think everyone's mind right now is just on getting things back to some semblance of stability. But I think within that, there's a lot of fear, I think, right now as well. And a lot of that just I think there's fear of like saying or doing the wrong thing. And then I think there's fear of sort of backtracking and things sort of going back in time in a way that we don't want. And my hope is that we can sort of find ways to release some of that fear and just go forward and tell good stories about hopefully good people. I think that can make a difference. Vince Gilligan just did a speech about this, the WGA, about like, let's make stories about good people. And I was like, yeah, I think that's what I hope that we do, because I think that can make a big difference. But I think specifically when it comes to diversity in the industry, I started my career as I've been the only woman in a room. I've been the only Black person in the room. I've been the only queer person. I'm bi. Like But then I've also been in rooms that were all women. And I've, been in rooms where there was a lot of diversity, where it was, 50-50 maybe. And, you know, so for me, I'm like, I can see the change, which is great. And as much as I'd love for it to be faster, I recognize that that's not exactly how things always work. So I think I'll say for me, I can even see the change in myself. I remember the first things that I wrote in college, the first like TV pilots that I was working on in college, I always had someone white as the lead because that's just what I thought would get on TV. That's just what I thought made sense. And it wasn't until at the end of college, my senior year, where I kind of was looking at it and I was like, what am I doing? Like, why have I not written anything about someone who looks like me or grew up like me or anything like that? And that was just a big internal shift of recognizing, like, I think sometimes it's easy to get in your head of like, write the things that it seems the industry wants. And that was a good lesson for me of like, no, write the things that feel true to you or write the things that you want to see. I think that's the most important thing is like, write the thing or tell the story that you wish that you could watch. And I think that gets you so much further. And so I guess overall, seeing the change in me and the change in the industry gives me a lot of hope. And I do feel like it's moving in the right direction, even if it's not always with the best intention, but I think we're getting there slowly but surely.
If you don't mind me asking, is there anything you've been through that personally has motivated you to keep going in terms of like your writing in that sense, in that context?
There was a show that I worked on. I've told this story on a podcast before, and I don't think I ever said what the show was, and I really shouldn't, and I'm not going to. But I worked on a show, and we were casting the season, and so far the entire cast was all white, every single actor in it. And there was like a handful of leads, and there was one we hadn't cast yet, like one or two. And I remember I was really adamant in the room, and I was still a pretty young writer. I think I was mid-level at this point. And I was really, really adamant that we had to cast someone of color. Everyone was like white and blonde. It was like crazy. And I was like, guys, I really, really think that we have the space. Like, can we cast like a Latinx actor? Can we cast a Black actor? Can we cast someone of color, please? And I remember the showrunner was like, well, if it's so important to you, like print out a bunch of headshots of like some actors you think would be good and I'll look through them. And I put in the time. Like I was going on IMDb, I was on Instagram, I was looking at any actor who I thought they would say yes to of many different like races and ethnicities and genders. I was like really trying. And I remember I print them out. One of the other writers on the show who was like kind of supporting me in it helped me. And we put them all out and put them in front of them. And I don't think they expected us to do that. And he kind of went through and was like, okay, yeah, I'll look through and think about it. And a few days later, one of the assistants who I was friends with overheard two of the like higher level producers talking and overheard them saying, Asha has really got to drop this diversity thing. And the other one was like, yeah, we know, but we can't say that. Just like let her play it out and it's fine. And I remember my friend telling me this and I was like, okay. And it really like lit even more of a fire under me. I'm sure what some people might have expected to happen is I would be like, okay, I would drop it because I don't want to get fired. And maybe that's even what I thought I would do. But no, I was like, no, I'm like leaning in even harder. And we did get diverse people cast in the show, like mainly because of the work that we put in. But I'll never forget hearing that because I was like, that's the exact thing that I shouldn't do then is drop it because that's what needed to happen. And it made the show better. And I think that's something that for me, just remembering that kind of gets me back of like, okay, yeah, no, I'm still, and because this was not that long ago. And so that for me was a moment that really lit a fire under me and made me realize how important it actually was for me. And yeah, that kind of was a big one.
Thanks for sharing that. It's good to hear that
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, that's very inspirational. Do we still have time for, it's 6:30 now.
So we have time, I think, for maybe one or two more questions from each of you, and then we'll wrap. But yeah, it's been so fascinating, Asha, Michelle, really. It's a really
Oh,
wonderful.
thank you.
So yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Okay. So I guess I'm curious about the upcoming projects that you're excited about, or even just like possible ones that you're hearing rumors of in your industry that you're excited to work on and continue to develop.
Yeah. Yeah, being in development is weird. I think that's the joke of LA is always like everyone's either working or they're in development. Because things will be in development forever sometimes. But yeah, obviously my animated witch project I'm really excited about. It's kind of like a we'll see what happens, but I feel excited and good about it. And I have a couple of others that are like pretty early days that I don't want to talk too much about, but they're kind of like in the early pitch stages. But I'm excited about sort of I think the ways that we're seeing different tropes and cliches of characters and stories get turned on their head in different ways in stories. I think that's really interesting to me. I think for me, I'm really interested in telling optimistic stories, and I hope that there's more of that coming down the pipeline. I'm working on a different animated show right now that's like the lead character is like meant to be the most optimistic guy in the universe, essentially, and that's kind of a big impetus for a story. And I think optimism is a big one for me that I'm interested in, not just writing but also watching. I think in terms of shows that I'm like hearing about, there's so many adaptations. I feel like there are endless adaptations. It's like as soon as I hear something that I did not know before I started in the industry, people get the rights to a book before they even come out, before the book is even released and anyone's read it. Someone has the rights to make the movie, and some writers got to write the movie. And so I think there are a lot of books that I've kind of now read and I'm like, oh, somebody's already on it that I'm excited about as well. But yeah, I think optimism is a big one for me. Everything that I'm writing right now, even, if the characters are evil or ridiculous or crazy, I think crazy, but just, kind of all over the place. I still want there to be the through line of some kind of optimistic outlook. Because that keeps me writing, keeps me interested and engaged. But yeah, I think that's for me the big one. I think the thing I'm most interested in is kind of which younger actors we're seeing are going to kind of be the next big thing. Like, I think with the SNL 50th having just happened, we've seen so many huge stars come out of SNL, and I'm really curious of like this batch, which ones are going to go on to like have their show and have their thing, and a lot of the sort of content that's marketed for younger audiences, which ones of them will kind of be the next big thing. And I have my guesses, but I want to keep it to myself in case I want to cast them in something before someone else.
Okay, great. Ernie, do you have one more question for Asha Michelle?
She answered everything I wanted to ask. I'm all set.
Anything else, Adam, that was on your list?
No, pretty much everything was answered. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's really been wonderful having you here, Asha Michelle. And I also learned a lot, some new lingo also, blow darting. applying. I'm really fascinated by the lingo also of the writing world. But it's also been really illuminating to hear about your path and sort of the things that inspire you and the places that you would like to go with it. And I'm so glad that you feel so optimistic also about what is happening.
Well, someone has to. Someone has to be the
Somebody has to
optimist,
be.
Catherine.
Yes, indeed. And that's also been inspirational, actually, to get that energy from you. So thank you for being so honest and open and authentic in sharing your experience. And also, I want to thank our co-hosts, Ernest and Adam, for moderating. Wonderful job, guys. And a big shout out also to Musawir Abrar, our event producer behind the scenes. So check out our entire 2025 lineup, as well as our great back catalog of speakers from 21, 22, 23, and 24 at dmd.uconn.edu/diverse. And don't forget to subscribe to us here on YouTube and follow our other social media channels at UConn DMD to see all of our department's great content. So again, thanks to Asha Michelle and our students and everyone who worked together to produce this great event. And most of all, thanks to all of you out there in our virtual audience for joining us today. I hope all of you are as inspired by Asha Michelle Wilson's work and insights as we are in the Zoom room. There is work to be done, but if we continue to inspire and mentor our young creatives, together we can change this digital world and hopefully the analog world also for the better. And stay tuned for our next Diverse Perspectives event on March 25th with digital media theorist and historian Tara McPherson. I hope you all can join us. And for now, goodbye and good evening.